You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone, welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I am Dustin and Tony is with me, and we're here to discuss everything from December 2nd through December 8th. And boy, was there some really big news that is going to be worth some discussion. And I'm sure some of you who have not been paying attention to the news since last week are probably thinking, oh, it's probably Discovery Plus. Well, we do have to talk about Discovery Plus, but that's not actually the big news. The big news, however, has to do with HBO Max, and we're going to get into that. But there's a bunch of other news that we're going to quickly breeze through real quick related to some of the other services before we get into those larger discussion pieces specifically regarding Discovery Plus and HBO Max. So first up with Netflix, there's a workplace comedy series called God's Favorite Idiot that has gotten its series order. There's a sci-fi thriller film called Stowaway that has landed at Netflix. Netflix has ordered the limited series The Unlikely Murder. They're also looking to reboot the young adult series Heartbreak High, and there's a thriller feature film called End of the Road that is also coming to Netflix. Jumping over to Prime Video, Amazon has landed the first run of the final season of Vikings. Technically, it's the final part of the final season. It's the second of 20 episodes. It's the second part, so it's the last 10 episodes of the Viking series, which has previously been on History, but Amazon has landed the first run of those final episodes. Hulu, there is the Watch Party feature, which we've talked about in the past, is now available to all Hulu subscribers, not just certain ones. It's out of beta. The true crime series Candy, which I know we talked about before, which is coming from Elizabeth Moss, it's a production company as well as Universal, and that is going to be heading over to Hulu as well. Paramount Plus / CBS All Access, it has been announced that CBS All Access, which I should say it hasn't really been announced because this was actually announced back in January during CES. CBS All Access was announced to be coming to Xfinity X1 devices as well as the X1 platform in general. So you're talking about the Flex devices and things like that. That was announced back in January, but now it's actually officially happening. CBS All Access is going to start rolling out, and just as a kind of a follow-up for that, HBO Max is also going to be landing on an Xfinity soon too. That's not huge news, but HBO has had an app on the Xfinity X1 devices, but has not switched over to HBO Max, and when you click on it, you just get the HBO content. But that deal has also been in the works, and it looks like that is going to be happening soon because the HBO tile has now changed to HBO Max, and it means that the HBO Max platform should be coming to Xfinity devices as well. All right, jumping over to Apple TV Plus, Acapulco has gotten a series ordered, which is a bilingual comedy series. Apple has given a straight-to-series order for Gutsy Women, which is coming from Hillary and Chelsea Clinton. Apple has also ordered the docuseries focusing on surfing champs. Disney Plus. Now, this is, I guess, the first discussion that we should have. Collider ran an article talking about whether or not Hulu should be folded into Disney Plus. Now, for those of you who don't keep up with the news on a regular basis like us and analysts and things like that, there was a trailer that released. It was kind of like a leaked trailer about 2 weeks ago. It was right before Thanksgiving, about Disney Plus 18, and it was basically I say hypothesizing, but it looked like it could be a real trailer. And the idea was that Disney Plus would start offering content for 18 and up within their actual platform, basically implementing parental controls and allowing some content, specifically movies like Logan and Deadpool and things like that, offering that type of content on Disney Plus for adults. Now, if you have been a longtime listener of the podcast, you know that Tony and I have had a massive problem with Disney Plus just not offering enough content for adults in general. Hulu has a wide variety of content. One of the things that constantly gets brought up with Hulu is that they have the streaming rights to a lot of ABC sitcoms or series that are very popular when it comes to, they have Grownish and Blackish, they have Modern Family. those don't really fit within the confines of Disney Plus, and they're over at Hulu, which means those very popular series that lasted a very long period of time, in some cases are still going, those series could be brought over to Disney Plus and actually have a home because they're geared towards adults. However, the way Disney Plus currently stands, it's not the case. Now, the article that we're here to talk about from Collider is actually talking about whether or not there could be some truth to the idea of Hulu being absorbed into Disney Plus. And I want to say two quick things before I open up the floor to Tony, which is basically there's a couple issues with rolling Hulu into Disney Plus. The first issue is that currently Comcast still owns a segment of Hulu. They are promised to be bought out by Disney, but currently Comcast still owns that. So they can't, at least the time being, they cannot just completely absorb Hulu, number one. Number two, Hulu may have content that is exclusive to Hulu, but the issue is that bringing over to Disney Plus creates new licensing deals because it's not the exact same situation. Certain shows that go to Hulu immediately after they air, those are specifically set in certain licensing rights that if by having them on Disney Plus would open up the deals to basically have to be adjusted. So there's a couple of issues with that. Now, as far as the Disney Plus 18 thing goes, honestly, I think that is entirely possible. I think it's likely to happen at some point because one of the biggest complaints, like I said, is the fact that they just don't have enough content to draw in adults. Adults are the ones who are paying for the service, and unless you have kids, you're not going to continue to pay for the service unless there is a certain level of content that is being offered at the service.
I know that this is a big wish by people, but it's just not going to happen anytime soon. And I'm definitely one who wants more adult content on there. I mean, I definitely enjoy, FX on Hulu. All that content's just been a lot of fun. There's a bunch of other shows on Hulu that I like a lot. Frankly, I like the user experience a lot more than I do on Disney Plus. But overall, this is not going to happen anytime soon. When people keep wishing it makes a lot of sense in my opinion, but it's not going to happen just due to because there's a lot of behind the scenes. There's a lot of complex licensing agreements that are between certain companies in Hulu and renegotiating that to work with, Disney. Yes, Disney might own them, but there's a difference between it being with Hulu and then being with Disney. But then you have to do something with the live TV side. How is that going to work out? There's a lot of complex issues that happen with these deals that I feel like are not talked about enough. They're not brought up a lot. It makes all this stuff just really hard to figure out. So there's a lot of corporate stuff that needs to happen. Lawyers need to get involved. So at the end of the day, this isn't going to happen anytime soon. Once again, I think it's a great idea, but I think that this type of talk just kind of needs to die. Maybe bring it back up in a year or something, but right now it's not even close.
I will say that as far as the live TV option, Hulu could, I guess, live on because right now it does have the most live TV subscribers as compared to any other company, and I don't see that completely disappearing. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of aspects of the businesses when it comes to these streaming services that don't get brought up. When articles like this that are hypothesizing a specific take on something, they're only focusing on what they need to focus on to prove whatever they're trying to prove. They're not focusing on necessarily the other aspects of the business. Live TV is a huge thing for Hulu because it is the number one company here in the United States that offers live TV. You can't just get rid of that, and I don't see that getting absorbed into Disney Plus because that's not the same. It's like a different type of business. Hulu has obviously original content and things like that, and that aspect of it just being a standalone streaming service that offers content, something could happen to that content, but I don't think that the content, the live TV option is going to disappear. It just doesn't make any sense because they are the leader, at least right now here in the United States. The other thing I just wanted to point out is just because there's the potential of the 18 plus thing to happen, and honestly, we're only days away from, as we're recording this, we're only 2 days away from Disney having their investor summit, and they're going to be talking all about streaming. It's basically all about streaming, and they're going to be talking about probably plans for the future for Hulu if they don't ignore it at all and just talk about Star. They're going to be talking about Disney Plus. There's probably going to be a slew of trailers and announcements related to Disney Plus and some of the content that's coming to the series. There's also bound to be talk about ESPN Plus and the other aspects of the streaming business when it comes to Disney. However, when it comes to the 18 plus thing, I think that's something that could be easily implemented and over time start to take some of that content off of Hulu. If they don't have the international plans for Hulu as they originally did before, and their goal now, as it was talked about during their quarterly earnings a couple quarters ago, is that their focus is going to be on launching Star as the option for international, and that's actually going to be the international option when it comes to kind of like the Hulu international option is using the Star brand. That makes Hulu even less enticing. And the other part of it, which was brought up, I believe I saw it on Twitter by Julia Alexander from The Verge, she said the other catch is that Disney still owes Comcast about $9 billion for the remaining aspect of what's left of their chunk of Hulu. And Hulu, as it stands right now, is not worth $9 billion. So maybe, as we have already predicted, Star is a way to get away from the Hulu brand, and Hulu just will basically cease to exist as time progresses. However, that leaves the TV option, which would have to be rebranded in some way, and the content could obviously migrate to Disney Plus. But I wish we were 2 days into the future, because we could be talking about what exactly the plans are for Hulu, and potentially the potential plans for Hulu based off of this investor summit, because I'm sure it's going to come up at some point during that.
Dustin, one more thing about Hulu's live TV option. Yes, that could potentially live on as its own service, but how much is that even profitable? Is the live TV side being subsidized by Hulu's 30 million-ish subscribers, and that pot of money?
That's absolutely right.
And so potentially you couldn't even split that business up because it might not even be profitable, just due to how TV rights are. So that's yes, as much as like that's a defining feature of Hulu Live TV, and it is the leader in terms of it just having more customers and also being, I think, the most well liked. You could potentially even split that business up. So even in this potential best case scenario, it could potentially just fail on its own. So that's another thing that I think people need to think about as well as we go is, but you could maybe keep Hulu as a brand with the live TV option, but with 3 million or 4 million subscribers, the margins might not even be worth it to even keep that as a business. And
the other thing to just piggybacking off of what you just said is that if Hulu doesn't have the steady stream of originals or steady stream of content that they're licensing for their library, does that make Hulu stand out when there's so many different live TV options out there? When you compare it to the next largest live TV service out there, which would be YouTube. YouTube has content that's free, but nowhere near the amount of content that Hulu offers. So right now there's a better deal if you subscribe to Hulu Live TV, because you get a larger on-demand library. You also get a larger amount of content that it offers, original content, as Hulu has significant, they're releasing at least a couple different originals every single month, no matter what they are. So the thing is, YouTube doesn't have that. They're not offering content on top of your live TV options. They're offering stuff on demand from those TV options that you are subscribing to, similar to the way cable television works. Hulu offers something just a little bit more than that, so that also comes into play as well. All right, so next up, Quibi. Quibi has officially shut down. That happened on December 1st. We all knew that was happening, but it has faded to black, as they say. All right, HBO Max. HBO Max has landed the streaming rights for the comedy series The Middle, which previously aired on ABC here in the United States and has over 200 episodes, so that's a pretty big get. Charlize Theron has inked a first-look deal with HBO and HBO Max. HBO Max is developing a detective comedy from the Astronomy Club creators. Astronomy Club previously aired on Netflix. HBO Max will begin offering 4K support along with each 4K Ultra HD Dolby Vision Atmos has also going to be released along with Wonder Woman 1984, which means originally when HBO Max launched, they did not have 4K offerings, even though some of the HBO content was available in 4K content or 4K, the 4K option. Unfortunately, they said at the time that was something they were going to roll out in time, but they did not have a timetable. Obviously, the big announcement of Wonder Woman 84 coming to the service is big enough where they're going to want it in the best quality that they possibly can. So we're going to start seeing other content get that 4K resolution and get the better sound options that HBO HBO Max will now offer, and that is immediately because of the release of Wonder Woman 1984 on Christmas Day.
This is a huge move. This has definitely been one of the biggest complaints of those who subscribe to HBO Max, is that they're paying premium top dollar for the service, and yes, they get a lot of content, but it's still at 1080p, and they're not able to get it at 4K, and then with the Dolby special formats and stuff like that. So this is huge. This is great. What a way to kick off. It's Christmas, but essentially 2021. With this, and there are other things we're going to talk about, releasing Wonder Woman, getting 4K. We know, I think we talked about last episode, that they're doing a few more international releases slowly. So this is, the beginning of some really great news for HBO Max.
All right, there is a pandemic heist film called Lockdown that is heading to HBO Max. There's a dramedy series called Woman Studies that is currently in development. HBO Max has announced that they are ending their free trial, and that is obviously ahead of Wonder Woman 1984. I'm pretty sure we talked about this last episode about how this was very likely to happen. Disney Plus did the exact same thing before the release of Hamilton, which was a highly anticipated release on the service. They got rid of theirs weeks before the release of Hamilton, and now HBO Max has done the exact same thing. The other big news that we're going to talk a little bit more at length in a minute here is that Warner Brothers has announced they're releasing their entire 2021 film slate to HBO Max and theaters on the exact same day. So similar to the way Wonder Woman 1984 is being released, where it will be available in theaters on Christmas Day, where it is able and allowed to be in theaters, it will also be available on HBO Max. All of the films, which is 16 other films, will also release on HBO Max simultaneously in 2021. Now, there's a lot of big films. The fourth Matrix film is one of them. There's Godzilla vs. Kong, which we talked about in the last episode. The Suicide Squad film, which is the next DC film, is coming out next year as well. There's a number of other films. Dune is a huge movie that is coming out as well. There's a lot of movies that are coming out in 2021. And like I said, we're going to talk more about this in a second. The other news right after this was that there was an article that popped up on Deadline where Casey Bloys was talking about the international rollout of HBO Max. And while we haven't heard a lot, we knew that there's movement on the international side of things because it was announced that they had put people in charge at HBO Max to focus on a European rollout of the service. And we also know that Latin America is another big focus for them to get into. While that's all happening, it turns out Casey Bloys, who's in charge of the content that actually comes of the service, said that they are looking to create local international originals from the DC library ahead of the international launch. So basically, as they start to roll out internationally, they're going to start looking at DC's library of characters and thinking, which characters can we use from these different international locales to create international shows that may be, in a different language, because that's what they're looking for. And while they've had success with other shows within specific regions of Europe releasing, and they actually then release here in the US as well, they are looking at obviously amping up the amount of offerings that they have as they move forward. So they clearly have a timetable, at least internally, as to when they are planning on rolling out in Europe and Latin America, and that would be why they're already looking at what content they can adapt into originals for those local areas. All right, next up, there was new data that came out by Aptopia stating that HBO Max is growing very quickly. Tony, go ahead and put your disclaimer on it, because I think it's important to say that up front before I go into details.
Essentially, it's really important to keep things in context. HBO Max, yes, it is growing. It's growing pretty huge. If you look at the net rate, it is, I forget what Aptopia says, but it's orders of magnitude bigger than CBS All Access, Disney Plus, even Netflix. But if you think about it, Netflix has, Dustin, correct me if I'm wrong, it's got like over 160 million global subscribers. Disney Plus has around 75 million. Those are just really rough numbers from what I remember about the show. CBS All Access has about 25, something like that. So the point is just, it might be growing fast, but if you look at how many total subscribers HBO Max has, or activations, however you want to think about it, it is substantially less than the rest. So yes, people might have charts and graphs that show, yes, net increases, graphs going up, like, hey, look, it's so much higher than the other one. But if you look at the long-term value, you look at everything else in scope, it's like, oh, okay, HBO Max is growing because they have no users and they're just getting what they can, versus these established players, their net positive, negatives, not really going to change that much, until there's like a big, international, expansion, or that there's some huge, scandal that's going to happen. It's, that's the only way to really boost things or have a decrease in subscribers. So, we're going to probably see the same amount of growth for Disney for when Discovery Plus finally launches. It's going to have this huge rate of adoption, but that doesn't really show that there's that many subscribers until we actually see that money. I mean, even Quibi, like for the first week or two, it had a huge explosion. Probably had similar numbers to what HBO Max has right now, but they barely had 3 million total paying subscribers or something like that at its high point. So everything in context.
Yes, and context is extremely important. And one of the other things to point out is Apptopia uses a lot of their data is based off of the amount of downloads that the mobile apps actually get. So they're looking at it from the perspective of how many people are downloading these apps. Now when they show the graphs on their website, they show Netflix and they compare it with Disney Plus, and basically what they're trying to point out is that HBO Max has been growing at a faster rate than Disney Plus or Netflix, but that isn't really the case. It's just that the app itself has been downloaded a lot more than over the given period of time since HBO Max launched compared to Disney Plus or Netflix, which I guess if you're looking at it from a different perspective, you could sit there and say, well, Netflix, they already had all of the, most of the people they had already had the app. So, of course, why would they be downloading the app? Disney Plus launched last November, not in May when HBO Max launched. However, the one bit of information that I did want to pull out of this that I think is good information is that over the past month, their engagement levels have been way, way higher. They've been significantly higher than in the past, or since they basically launched, where in the month of October, the amount of engagement that they had for the service was about 36% higher than it had been prior, which means there was some sort of content on HBO Max that they were offering that drew people in and that were having people use the app more frequently. And that's been a lot of that has been attributed to the fact that The Undoing came out at the end of October. That's one of the the big shows that a lot of people have been talking about. It's been getting a lot of buzz. That has now carried over into November, where we had the release of The Flight Attendant, a big HBO Max original that launched the weekend of Thanksgiving and had the first 3 episodes and continues to get more and more engagement with every episode that they're releasing. So that's huge numbers. Now, the next bit of news, what actually released today, there was a summit that was held and John Stinky was there and talked about how HBO Max has jumped to over 12 million activations since the last time they talked about activations, which was, they basically talked about at the end of Q3, which was at the beginning of October, and those numbers that they discussed at the beginning of October, they were sitting at about 8.4, and now they're sitting at about 12.6 million activations. So in just 2 months, they have increased over 50% their number of activations from the possibility of 30 million that they've had in the past. So the point is, they've been having some success over the past 2 months, and a lot of that obviously has to do with a couple of things. The Undoing was very buzzy, got a lot of people talking about it, and had great numbers when it came to just people watching the series and discussing it and things like that. That was October. You roll into November, you get the announcement that Wonder Woman 1984 is coming on Christmas Day. That's going to obviously boost people checking out the service and starting to realize maybe I should activate my HBO Max account if I have access to it. Then you get the rollout of The Flight Attendant. Again, great numbers there. And now here we are a week after the announcement that the film slate for 2021 is also going to be coming. And of course, more people are thinking, wow, maybe I really should go activate my HBO Max account. So it's doing what they want, which is drawing people into the service to make sure that they get those activations. All right, let's continue on, and we'll come back, like I said, to the HBO Max film slate. Peacock, we have nothing. Discovery Plus is officially launching on January 4th. It is going to be available at $4.99 with ads or $6.99 without ads. It's going to include over 55,000 hours or 55,000 episodes of television content from across all of the Discovery family of networks. That includes HGTV, TLC, Discovery, Animal Planet, OWN, ID, Food Network. I'm probably forgetting at least a couple because they have a ton of brands. So over 1,000 hours of original content is planned within the first year of its launch. The Magnolia content, which Magnolia is the network the next network that Discovery is launching, that will have a preview where they will have a number of different types of content from that network actually premiering on Discovery Plus, as the network has been delayed on their launch. Finally, Discovery is basically aiming for tens of millions of subscribers. The CEO, in my opinion, who I've obviously complained about multiple times in the past, has said that this is really a great way to compete with Disney because they have the potential to compete with Disney, and they have tons of content. The basis behind that argument is that they own their content of library. They have a huge library of content, as they've produced thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of content over the years for the variety of their different networks, and they own it. They can go, and they don't license their content out to other places. So there's a lot of places that content is not available unless you have this. They are planning a international rollout slowly, but it will be only launching in the United States on January 4th. But basically, I mean, Tony, what do you think? Discovery Plus, was it worth the wait?
No, but to be fair, I'm probably at the target audience of the content there. It doesn't really appeal to me, but I know that there's a sizable demographic of people who would enjoy, and that's great for them. I mean, it's great for Discovery that they have a demographic to target that's reasonably huge, and good for them. It's about time they finally release the service, and it's January 4th. That's great for them. However, I do agree with the analysts, and a lot of them are basically they're happy, they're excited about Discovery Plus. There's a positive attitude towards it, but there's just heavy skepticism about it, and I think it's healthy just due to there's a lot of hype about the service, but there's not a lot of transparency of, okay, what are the financial projections, what are subscriber numbers, what are they going to reach. And if you remember, as we talked about HBO Max launching, it's like, okay, in 1 year we're aiming for X amount of subscribers. Here's the 5-year plan. Here's I think for Disney, right, it's going to be in 5 years it's going to be profitable, and it's going to pull in a profit. Obviously they've blown out their projections, but still with the profit thing is going along. So there's not much information in terms of that Discovery Plus that the executives there released, and that's making some analysts kind of worried, because then it's on the analysts to really figure out this. And analysts are analysts. They're not bad people. They're really good, but Disney, Discovery Plus knows their content. They know who they're aiming for, even better than analysts do. So it is a little worrisome that there's just more hype and not enough documentation and an explanation of how they're going to reach their goals. I'm kind of there for a healthy skepticism, just because I personally won't get the service because it's not interesting to me. I think that there's a big demographic for it. There's a potential to where it could be a pretty decent mid-tier streaming service. I do not see it, going into Disney Plus, Netflix type levels, even Hulu type levels. Probably see it in the 20 million range, just because of how many people like that type of content. So that's kind of my thoughts. Just happy, but skeptical.
Yeah, my basis I have just a slightly little bit of a different take. I think that, like you said, it could be as big as about 20 million. I think that's where that they would probably be sitting. As far as international goes, if they when they eventually get to the point where they start rolling out internationally, there might be a larger number to get higher. But I'm not familiar enough with how Discovery does in international markets to know whether or not it actually work. I know here in the United States, they do well. Their cable channels do extremely well, and people are watching them, and they get a lot of talk about some of their shows. So there's no question that it can get to the level of successes like something like CBS All Access, or even maybe Peacock, where it could get as big as that, but I just don't see it getting bigger than that. I will say their price point is spot on. I really like their price point. I still am not going to subscribe to the service myself, but I think that a $4.99 price tag with ads and a $6.99 price tag without ads is a perfect price point to draw people in. Now, whether or not they raise the price in a couple of years, that's obviously most likely going to happen. But I will say that price point is a really, really good price point. The one thing that I guess I have a problem with about this whole announcement is that, one, it took as long as it did for them basically to say, here's the service, it's coming in 1 month, which is nice that it's coming out right away, because, if we had to wait any longer, it'd be ridiculous given how long it's already been waited on. However,
right away. I mean, it's been in the pipeline for like a year and a half. So let's use the word right away. That phrase pretty liberally here.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's coming out, and the only thing I guess I don't understand is why is it not rolling out internationally in other markets right away? Because there isn't a reason to really hold back. They already have, as they have already pointed out, they own their content. So while obviously deals have to be in place with the cable companies and things that already market their stuff so they don't lose money on that stuff, it does feel like they have talked about this for such a long period of time. And other than having, we're going to have over 1,000 hours of originals over the first year. Okay, that's great, but you also create an enormous amount of content. Like, how many hours in comparison to the amount of hours they produce for all of their networks is that percentage? Because I don't really think it's that high. I think that if you look at their whole basis of what they do at Discovery is it's a lot of reality television. There's a variety of it, but it's all reality. Like, you've got nature documentaries, they're all reality. You've got crazy stuff on TLC like 90 Day Fiancé and things like that get a lot of talk online. You have HGTV where it's a lot of home improvement shows or things where people are building, like remodeling things. They can produce content. One of the reasons they're so successful, that company is because the content they create is not very expensive to create. So saying that you're going to have over 1,000 hours, that number seems great, but how many hours in comparison to the number of hours that you're creating for your network? The other thing that they announced was the current seasons of shows that are airing will not be available until they are completely 100% done airing on the normal cable channels, which I think is a downfall too, because if someone was looking to subscribe to Discovery Plus as an alternative for having to subscribe to cable in order to see some of these shows like 90 Day Fiancé that gets a lot of talk online, you're not going to be able to, because you won't be able to watch it until after the service or after the show actually ends its season on broadcast, or in this case, cable television. So that's my only, I've got my own set of qualms about the announcement, but I think the price point is great. I think they will be successful in getting some subscribers, but the idea of tens of millions, I think, is going to be 10 plus a 10 and maybe max out around 20 million here in the United States. All right, so moving right along, outside of Discovery Plus, jumping over to a niche streaming service, IMDb TV has ordered a true crime docuseries called Moment of Truth. Disney has considered moving major sports rights over to ESPN Plus. I included this specifically because obviously that's a no-brainer. Over time, as ESPN Plus gets bigger, that's where, and they're drawing more money in from that, and they can warrant basically the fall off of ESPN on the cable side of things because it's become profitable enough as a digital service by itself. It makes sense to do that. However, the one thing that I did include in here is that they said that they were also considering selling off their stake in A&E, which is they own a 50% stake, which a lot of people don't know about, and then they also own Freeform, which previously they got years ago when they bought Fox Family, which was a family channel, and then they turned it into ABC Family, and then it morphed into Freeform. But there's been talk about A&E being a perfect match to be bought by Discovery, and Discovery has the money to buy that, so I just included because I think it was interesting, and of course would bolster Discovery Plus's online offerings with the addition of the A&E content and things like that. Finally, WarnerMedia has been eyeing the creation of 2 more streaming services. Just real quick, one of the services is CNN, which I am opposed to just because I think it's splintering the already option of putting CNN content in some format on HBO Max and getting people to use that option on HBO Max. The other option is a TBS TNT service, specifically offering content for free that you normally would be able to see on TBS or TNT, but having it offered with ads instead, so an ad-supported service. Again, I don't know why you would do this. I think it would make way more sense to offer the same content on HBO Max once they roll out an ad version. I don't see the TBS TNT thing getting off the ground. It just doesn't feel like it's worth the time or the resources to do that. When it comes to the CNN, I think that it makes sense to do something with CNN, but I think it needs to be implemented in HBO Max, and then that can in some way maybe be a thing that they can make HBO Max more appealing and raise the price up.
I do not like this direction about WarnerMedia. There's no you have the fragmentation. Okay, I somewhat get about seeing, but I feel like that would be a really interesting like if you want to think about how HBO Max and Disney kind of have this like channel concept of stuff where you have this whole bucket of, you know, different projects of Star Wars, Marvel, you probably have like a DC channel on HBO Max type thing going on. That would be kind of interesting with like CNN. You can have this whole like news section and, you know, the documentary series that CNN does, live news, blah, blah, blah. That would be pretty interesting, but I just don't see a streaming service. I don't see people paying for a streaming service on news. I mean, goodness sakes, people don't really buy newspapers anymore. People barely go to news sites to read news. You know, they go to social media. So just because of all that, I don't see a news streaming service going to be any good. I find it weird that they would spin off TNT and TBS stuff unless there's like weird contract stuff that, you know, I don't know about. It just doesn't make sense to spin that content off on its own. You can bring that in. What's nice about TNT and TBS is that they have established relationships in the sports world of like hosting NBA games and then March Madness. You could potentially bring those relationships over on HBO Max and then you could stream those games on there. So just overall, why? You know, we've seen this pattern from WarnerMedia for months now. Like, okay, like they're thinking about, you know, getting rid of Crunchyroll, consolidating services. You know, they just had Warner Max and they've folded it in HBO Max. So you've seen months of them, you know, consolidating their resources and making it more streamlined and efficient. And then now they want to create 2 more streaming services. I don't get the logic there.
You asked the question of who would pay for news, and funny story, Fox actually has a news streaming service. It's called Fox Nation. It's only $5.99 per month if you go the monthly route. I mean, realistically, it actually is expensive when you compare it to the other streaming services and what they offer, but they have a ton of original content. The thing that everybody always brings up when they talk about Fox Nation and how it works and whether or not it's successful is that the one catch, of course, is that they're not offering the content that is actually on Fox News. They're offering content very similar, as well as a ton of other original shows, but it's not the same content that is on Fox News because of those cable deals, those cable license, you know, the carriage deals that are in place.
See, my dad would probably like that streaming service, but he watches a lot of the opinion pieces, and I feel like that's what makes, you know, Fox News, you know, kind of special, is that their hosts are very interesting personalities, and that's what draws a lot of people to Fox. It's not always just the news; it's the opinion pieces, and if you're not able to get, you know, Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity, if you like that stuff, like that's a huge draw for their network. I mean, like just look at advertising dollars; they bring in so much money for Fox, and so if you don't have the big personalities in their shows on there, that's a really, you know, huge thing. It doesn't really make sense for me for Fox. CNN, they don't really have that, you know, those types of personalities. You know, you have Anderson Cooper, you might have Wolf Blitzer, but they don't command that type of audience as Fox. And so even just doing a direct comparison between Fox and CNN in this situation, just on its face, like if I just don't see, you know, CNN working out if that's the case. It doesn't make sense in my head for many different reasons. And we just did that pro and con, that contrast with Fox. And you know, once again, come back to this conclusion of why. Like, just roll it in HBO Max. You can have its own like news section, and I think everybody would be happy. I mean, that would be pretty compelling as a you know, streaming service. Yeah. The next presidential debates, I mean, you know, Senate debates that are going on right now with Georgia that just happened, I think, a few days ago. I mean, there's a lot of things that, you know, CNN presidential addresses, doesn't really matter who the president is, like that gets some eyeballs. So and they would be pretty much the only one. And yeah, you know, Disney would probably eventually might want to roll like ABC into their thing. NBC might do it as well, but
NBC has actually already done that because they have news aspects of NBC on Peacock. It's just, again, it's not the same stuff that you find on MSNBC or NBC News. It's like extra offerings.
Huge loss. That's a huge loss for those streaming services. Like, put the content that people watch on the news channel, like on the streaming service.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to they don't want to cannibalize their current carriage deals, and I understand that, but CNN makes the most sense, like you said, because to a degree, CNN doesn't have those like top tier news anchors that everybody's talking about. Like, obviously, they have news anchors that everyone knows, Anderson Cooper and Wolf Blitzen. Yeah. They're not
top tier in terms of like professional. I just want to make it clear.
Oh, yes.
Like, they're great at what they do. They're very professional at what they do. They're top notch, you know, journalists and news anchors, but they do not command the type of, viewership as some of the Fox anchors or NBC or MSNBC anchors.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So like they could adapt their content, offer a lot of the content that CNN offers, but in like more of an on-demand fashion, and then have, because let's be honest, the part of CNN is HLN, which is headline news, and that is not as popular, but it exists, and it's still, obviously chugging along. So there's no reason something like that, they couldn't do something very similar where it's like CNN Max or something like that, where it's like, this is CNN for HBO Max. It's not the exact same thing. It keeps their carriage deal safe for the time being, but offers something that other services aren't. So there's that. All right, moving into the main discussion here. The WarnerMedia, obviously the 2021 shift, the theatrical shift to streaming is huge. It's massive. Now, there's a couple of finer points that I wanted to touch on. There's a couple of interviews that Jason Kilar did with a variety of different websites, specifically talking about their thought process behind this. And a lot of their reasoning for this is that a lot of the medical professionals that they've talked to, they've discussed whether or not a actual vaccine is going to be feasible right away, and whether or not things are going to get back to normal as quickly as everyone anticipates. And as we talked about in the last episode, even if a vaccine came out right away, it's going to take time before everybody can actually get the vaccine. On top of that, there's also going to be there's still going to be a desire for people to stay in. They're not going to go out right away. They're not going to immediately start going back to streaming or sporting events or going to theaters or going to live shows and things like that. It's just, unfortunately, one of the fallouts of the global pandemic. So with that, they looked at it and said, even if the vaccine does come in early 2021, it's very unlikely that by mid 2021, we're going to have a lot of options to get movies into the theaters. When you look at the major studios out there, this is not his words, these are mine. When you look at the major studios out there, they all have their fair share of large movies that they want to come out in movie theaters. They want their big blockbusters to hit movie theaters because they have the potential of making the most amount of money. However, when you have as many movies as all the movies that got pushed from 2020 into 2021, you already have the movies that you already had planned for 2021 sitting right there on the shelf too. And then you have movies that are obviously already planned out for 2022 and beyond. You have to either start shifting things around, or you have things coming out so close together that they don't have the potential to be as profitable as they could. If movies are coming out, like perfect example, Black Widow is coming from Disney. Disney releases Black Widow. It would normally have about 3 weeks to perform very well and make a significant amount of money here in the United States. In 2021, if the vaccine was actually successful, there's absolutely no way Black Widow would have 3 weeks to basically own the box office because of how many movies have been shifted into 2021 on top of what's already been planned for 2021. So there's that. So they said, so going back to what Jason Kilar said, he said that this is a direct decision that they made because they don't think that 2021 is going to get back to normal as quickly as some people have predicted. And because of that, they've decided that they're going to put the movies on the service. They still believe in the theatrical model. They're not trying to blow up theaters and say theaters are done for. They still believe it, and that's why they're making them available simultaneous in theaters. However, they can see that there just isn't going, 2021 is not going to be, everything goes back to normal. I mean, as we know right now, the COVID cases are continuing to rise, and we're just not having things get back to normal as some people would have predicted. So that being said, this is what WarnerMedia has decided to do. So there's 2 really good interviews to take a look at that. Those are the first things. The other thing that I want to talk about is there's an article here. There's 2 articles talking about, one, John Stankey talking about the decision to do this, which is, it's the same kind of stuff that Kilar said. So you could take a look at that. There was a piece on CNBC talking about how HBO Max is also, there's a fight within WarnerMedia to keep HBO basically at the soul of what it used to be, but it's shifting very rapidly based off of these decisions. There was a really good point that was made online by the entertainment strategy guy a couple weeks ago when Wonder Woman 1984 was announced, which is HBO gained popularity not because of their original content, but because through the 80s and 90s, they were always best known for releasing a film on their service every Saturday night. So every Saturday night, if you subscribe to HBO, you would always have a brand new film that was releasing. I shouldn't say brand new, but a film that would be released for the first time on your television compared to being able to see it in theaters. And that's how they gained popularity. Obviously, the late 1990s going into 2000s, they started creating a lot of really good original content, and that boosted up the amount of subscribers that they had. But that is what they've always been known for. That, I mean, HBO literally stands for home box office. So it makes perfect sense that movies still are a part of HBO Max when it comes to that. So there's that article. What do you think about this shift?
Yeah, just thinking about HBO Max, there's been so much news, and personally, I'm looking forward to it. I'm really excited about what's happening and what we're going to see. There's just so much to unpack here, and I feel like maybe I'm going to start repeating myself due to just my stances on some things, but it's 2021. I mean, it's 2020. It's going to be 2021. It's not going to hopefully not be as crazy, but it's still going to be, we're not going to get back to normal for a very long time. And then, what is normal at that point? People are scared to go outside. People are scared to go to the movies, go to the gym, even go to eat, even go into Walmart can bring to the store, a huge grocery store for the international people who don't know what Walmart is. They're even, skeptical of going there just because of the threat of the virus. And, just what politicians are saying and, companies are saying is that, the vaccine, when it comes, probably will be coming to mass distribution. And what was it? I think June was one of the earliest projections just to, the general public. So at least the United States. So it's going to be a long time. And, usually February is a pretty good month for movies. Late April, beginning of May has been, historically very good for movies, and you get the summer months going on. There's just a lot of windows that are not going to be open anymore, and you got to adapt. What are these companies going to do? They're sitting on these pretty huge blockbusters of movies, and neither do they take the loss. They've sat on them for 2020. They're going to sit on them for maybe 2021, and then maybe in 2022 when the world might be back to normal. There's no guarantee, and you're betting on people going to the movies, and after a whole year of not going to the movies, I don't expect people to just go run and do that. It just doesn't make sense in my opinion, of how can you expect that that's going to happen? You're not going to get the same volume from before, right after this pandemic thing. So you have to adapt, you have to change. And for these companies, you can look at it as an investment situation. Instead of investing money into HBO Max, they're going to invest, these big, huge pieces of content, these huge, capital in terms of economics, just into the streaming service and to inject it and give it a lot of life. And what makes HBO Max interesting in comparison to other streaming services that have dumped their movies is that they have, I think the article posted maybe 8 to 10 movies, but there's definitely more out there. They can space them out, once per month or something like that. And that will keep people engaged. That will keep people, coming back to the service because, okay, this month we're getting Dune. This month we're getting, Kong versus Godzilla or Godzilla versus Kong, whatever that is. Next month they're getting The Matrix 4, just seeing, Keanu Reeves again. It kind of changes the idea of we talked about, so streaming services need to have content that is, lasting. That's why I think we prefer, really good TV shows over movies on streaming services because it gets people back, every single month or every single week. And then, it stretches out for months, every single month. And we're kind of having that same strategy with, Warner Brothers movies that they're going to release. And I think that's huge. I'm really excited about this as a move. I am, disappointed to see that there are some people who are saying that this is the death of movies and how can WarnerMedia do this and blah, blah, blah. For WarnerMedia, what are they supposed to do? Take this financial loss, not try to make anything back on this year? As a business sense, that doesn't make any sense. Forget, having HBO Max. They could have just licensed out their content to Netflix or something, at least got something for it, but now they have HBO Max. It makes sense that, okay, we can't, do the normal way and now we got to adapt. I don't expect what some people want. It's what has to happen. But I think there is a place for the movies. There's going to be a place for the movies in the future because even post, 2020, 2021, there's something about the movies that's fun. You make memories. There's something about, certain types of films when you go, you get an experience that you can't necessarily get at home. And yes, those movies are enjoyable at home, but they're not the same as if you went to a movie theater. So I feel like, COVID has really accelerated a trend that probably would have happened in, 3 to 5 years maybe, but it's accelerated to the point, okay, this is the new normal. This is now. And it just is what it it is. Either we can try to enjoy it, make the best of it, and have some fun, or we can, stay upset of like, how come, HBO Max is, changing everything up? How dare they? I feel like as a consumer, you should be happy. And I feel like as an executive, yes, the industry is changing. Yes, things are changing for HBO, WarnerMedia. You might be taking a substantial, potential, cash hit, but you're growing your streaming service. And for other executives in the space, I think it provides some more opportunities of, okay, like, HBO Max did it. What if we, we're able to release our, big budget movies at the same time on the streaming service and in theaters and get the best of both worlds for a little bit? It's, HBO Max has really opened the door, and I'm curious what other streaming services are going to follow through it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, ultimately it comes down to this. WarnerMedia, I tweeted this out, they're between a rock and a hard place. They've got films sitting on their shelf that they could easily do something with. But if they keep them there on the shelf, they're just going to collect dust. Any money they've already poured into marketing some of these films is going to, go away, and they're just going to continuously lose money. While I wouldn't say that every one of the 16 movies that are releasing on HBO Max needed to release on HBO Max, I mean, I'm sure it's entirely possible that some of the bigger blockbusters could have had maybe a little bit longer of a theatrical window before they end up on HBO Max. I'm not going to discount it, because I think the premise of the entire plan that they're doing is that HBO Max is the place to go if you want to see these films, and you don't have to see them in theaters, at least in 2021. Killar's comments about, well, this is only for 2021. We're not saying this is going to happen, going forward with every film. It makes sense. I'm not going to disagree with the idea that this is, a plan for 2021 for two reasons. One, to bolster HBO Max, get more subscribers over to that service, because that is their direct-to-consumer offering that the company has. And then the other aspect of it is 2021 is still, like you said, is going to be a place where it's not going to be normal. We're not going to get back to everything being the way it was pre-COVID in 2021. It's just not going to happen. So I think that this plan works. Now, the other catch, of course, is that how does this affect the people who work with WarnerMedia? And this has been the discussion that has been online the last couple days. After the announcement came out, everybody was like, well, there was analysts who were immediately like, well, this is screwing over the theaters. The theaters aren't going to survive something like this. Everybody seems to forget there's still 4 other studios, unless every studio decides to do, or 4 major studios, I should say, unless every studio decides to do this, it's not going to kill the theaters. It just frees up the space for the other films that are releasing to make a little bit more money if things do go back to normal, like somehow these analysts are assuming they will. So there's that. I don't think theaters are getting screwed over. But anyway, the talk for the negative on this was theaters were being screwed over. There's not really a negative to HBO Max or the customer or the consumer or the subscriber. This is a huge plus to them. Like, obviously, this is a huge thing. I think in the future, going into 2022, could there be some sort of aspect where for an additional fee on top of your subscription, you're offered these films? We've talked about this in the past. We've talked about what kind of offerings could they have in order to, basically get away from the theatrical model, but still be able to have things. And I think that is entirely possible, but that's obviously a further way out. I do think that there was now, of course, okay, so getting back to what people are talking about now. So the big talk, of course, is that WarnerMedia, or Warner Brothers specifically, has been a company that a lot of talent really enjoys working with. When it comes to directors, they have a long history of having directors and talent, specifically actors, producers, working with them for a long period of time, because Warner Brothers has become the studio amongst the top studios where talent is respected. Talent is allowed to do things that other studios wouldn't necessarily allow them to do. Places where, the studio where they have no problem paying their talent well for the content they're allowing. A perfect example, and I'm bringing this up as an example for a specific reason, is Chris Nolan. Chris Nolan is all about the theatrical release, and his film Tenet got delayed, and he was adamant about him wanting it to be the film to potentially usher in the theatrical return, getting theaters to return to normal, and his film being that one because he wanted his film to release in theaters. He was very adamant about that, and Warner Brothers, well, they did exactly what he wanted, and they brought that film to theaters. And subsequently, the film didn't do as well as anybody would have hoped, but not because it wasn't a good film, but because people just weren't going to the theaters, at least here in the US. So the film ended up grossing about $360 million worldwide, but here in the United States, it grossed under $60 million, which was significantly lower than any other Chris Nolan film because of what's currently happening with the pandemic. They went and spent money marketing the film. They went and spent money, obviously, making the film, and they probably lost money overall because the film was rumored to have cost over $200 million, not including marketing. So they probably lost money on that money on that film to make sure that Chris Nolan got the film out in theaters exactly the way he wanted it. Unfortunately, it also showed that the theatrical model in this current situation with the pandemic does not work, and that's the biggest thing. So the question, of course, from the analysts who are fine-tuned into the entertainment industry and talk about streaming was, well, how does this affect the talent relations? How is Warner Brothers going to be paying the back-end amounts off of these films to the talent associated? And if you're unfamiliar with this isn't stuff that we cover in depth here, but basically, if a film does really well, talent, high-profile talent like top-billed cast and the director, typically they walk away with a larger sum of money. It's like a bonus. Like the movie does really well, you walk away with a bonus. Wonder Woman 1984, Patty Jenkins, the director, and Gal Gadot, they were said to have made a $10 million bonus just because the Warner was trying to make sure that they were happy with the fact that the film was coming to HBO Max. And even though it was, wasn't going to be having as big of a theatrical release. Now, the other 16 films, of course, that are releasing on HBO Max, they didn't fine-tune those deals in place for the release of those films to say that the top-tier talent or the directors were going to be getting that large of a bonus. It's going to be difficult to shell out that kind of money all year long for these films to the talent associated with them. So then the question is, well, how do you make it up? Well, it turns out less than a couple hours before the announcement went public that the film slate was coming to HBO Max, that's when they started notifying talent and directors and agencies and things like that. And it came as a shock because it wasn't like we're asking your permission, we're just telling you how it's going to be. So there's some people who are very upset by that. One of those people is Christopher Nolan. Even though Christopher Nolan doesn't have a film coming out in 2021, he has been extremely vocal saying that HBO Max is the worst streaming service out there, and I'm pretty sure he's stating that because of the decision that was made by WarnerMedia to release these films. Because he's such a proponent for theatrical releases, he's saying that this is a very bad decision and he's very upset. And it's very likely that he won't be working with WarnerMedia in the future because of his comments, just because, whatever. But at the same time, you have to look at his comments and say, well, didn't they do exactly what you wanted to do with the film? And you were the one who was adamant about people going back to the theaters to save the theaters. And one, the theaters weren't saved by Tenet coming out. And two, people didn't want to go out to the theaters. And that's not going to change anytime in the near future. Now, there's other people out there, like a good example, Steven Soderbergh. He has come on record and said that, this is unfortunately just something that has happened due to, the current situation that the world is in. This isn't something that Warner is doing and saying that this is the only way it's going to be going forward. They explicitly said that this is just their plan for 2021 and that they'll plan on 2022 when we get to 2020 or when we get closer to 2022. So I think there's some level-minded people, and I think there's some people who are getting very upset by it. Chris Nolan, honestly, I think anybody who knows him, knows how he is when it comes to theatrical releases, would assume that this would be something that he would get upset about. But it is frustrating when you look at the larger picture, which is these films, if they held them to 2022, that means you either decide to take a halt on all production and not create anything in 2021 because you essentially have to adjust your entire release schedule so that you're not consistently having the theaters back to back with releases, going into 2022 and forward from there. So the real question is, obviously, I know how you stated how you felt when it came to this whole premise of doing the film slate on HBO Max. But when it comes to the talent, do you think WarnerMedia shot themselves in the foot with the talent, specifically because they're known for being such a talent-friendly studio. Do you think that they shot themselves in the foot?
I think it's a little bit too soon to judge that, given that there's only been one creator who is really complaining. I mean, I know that Patty Jenkins wasn't really a fan of doing it this way, but ultimately she got on board and it's making the best of it. I don't think that HBO Max wants to do this as a first option. Like, it's not like they're going out and it's like, hey, we're going to revolutionize the industry just because, we're going to do it.
That's true.
I feel like the general public is, at least I expect them to give HBO Max, a little bit of a break of like, desperate times call for desperate measures. And we're going to change up the game, not because we're trying to be trailblazers, but because we as a company want to make money. We as a company have employees and we want to make some type of money to grow the service in some way. And like, hey, here's an opportunity. I just feel like holding on to this idea that theaters are the only way to watch movies or certain types of movies is just, it's archaic. Like, it's, theater chains were already getting screwed over. Like they were already on the downhill track. It's not like there was something new that was happening. Yeah, COVID just accelerated it, but there's nothing like new going on. Just people do not want to go to the movies anymore. And you see like AMC has spent a lot of money to renovate the theaters to make it more of a joyous experience. But I've been to many big budget movies on opening night and there were hardly anybody there. It just isn't the same anymore. You have this nostalgic factor of the movies, and that's not how people want to do it anymore. Big screen TVs are cheaper. You have streaming services. And frankly, the certain types of movies that do draw a lot of butts and seats are not, it's a pretty, niche type of just like action movies, superhero movies that really get, a lot of, and then animated movies, but really get a lot of the ticket sales, if you split up all the movies. I mean, was it 2018 or 2019? I mean, how much money did Marvel make in comparison to the rest of the, box office industry, the rest of the box office globally? Like, they earned so much. It was just superhero films, I don't think they're going to lose any creatives. I think if I was a creative, I would be worrisome about what happens after 2021 or what happens after, at least for the United States, which is the biggest market in terms of global box office. And then, China could be a close second, depending on the type of movie. It just depends on how COVID is handled in the United States and how much consumer confidence is built back up, how much, people are, have confidence back to go to movie theaters and whatnot. And you might see this in 2022, but at a certain point, there's going to be reckoning with HBO and WarnerMedia about the future. And are they going to keep this agreement? Or are they going to, get rid of it? Do you think that it really also depends on the engagement? Like, is it still going to be the same amount of people who are going to go see the theater because they're always theater people? And you're not going to get more eyes on the movie due to it, being out on the streaming service also. And you can get those people who aren't necessarily going to go to a movie theater anyway. You can get them on board and, the first month or two. And like, those are really important numbers for like projecting success of a movie and whatnot. There's just some interesting questions going there. And then there's interesting questions of funding. Like, Tenet, yeah, it might have gotten, would you say like 300 million? But how long was it in the theater? I mean, yeah, granted, there was nothing really else going on in the theaters, but it seemed like it was in the theater an extraordinarily long time, like longer than normal. And I feel like that kind of skews the number a bit. But like, yeah, each WarnerMedia is going to have to worry about the financial side of things. Sometimes box offices are huge, sometimes they're small, and creators and actors, get, if they're really good, can get a percentage of that. Like Robert Downey Jr. got a percentage of, the certain X movies that he was in. So you got to worry about that as well. So there's a whole bag of factors that are going to have to be addressed. But I feel like that's like a late 2021 problem. I feel like people going into it just realize that it's just a weird year. It's a weird year for movies and content. The fact that we're seeing parodies of like the pandemic on like Superstore and other TV shows and comedies is just it's great examples of where we are right now. It's a weird time. I mean, I don't think that people are going to hold it WarnerMedia. They're not going to have a bad view of them. Frankly, they might have a positive view of them potentially of like, hey, we can reach both theaters and streaming service all at the same time. I mean, there could be a potential positive view by creators of this move that we kind of haven't, touched about because it is new. But there might be like a huge draw for creatives. Like, we can do this new opportunity now. I mean, I think Chris Nolan he's always been one to, I won't say buck the trend, but always want to say his mind. I remember, you might remember this too, I mean, a few years ago, there was a big push to move to digital cameras. Red was, becoming a big brand, and he was very stuck on his films being on 35 millimeter and 70 millimeter. And that's where he shot Dunkirk on. And it was a beautiful film, but I remember he got in a very tense public spat about that and how he still wants film to be a thing. And looking back, there have been more films and TV shows that have used more digital cameras than they are film. Like, it's just a dying thing.
It's also more costly to do film.
Oh, it's hugely more costly. And one of the biggest processors of film was, Kodak, and they kind of went out of business. So it's just, yeah. So he's one to, what I'm trying to say is, like, he's always one to speak his own mind. And, I appreciate that about him, that he's a good filmmaker. He has strong opinions. And I feel like with his type of success that he is, and definitely he's obviously always allowed to say his opinion, but I feel like his opinion does have weight. And I feel like having an opposing side to, arguments kind of helps helps bring the truth about. And I feel like he does have some valid points. I just disagree just because it's 2020, 2021. It's just a unique situation of things. But if this was like the normal course of events, I think he has a really good argument, and it's really fair.
Yeah, I think ultimately, if it was happening in any other situation where theaters were still open and HBO Max was doing this right now, by all means, I think I would also and I want to make it clear, I love going to the movie theaters. I mean, before I had children, I used to go to the movie theaters 2-3 times a month. I loved going to the movie theaters. I had children. Of course, that eats away your time. You don't have as much time. You can't get a babysitter as frequently as you want. So I haven't, been able to go as much. And now my children are just getting to the age where I could start to go more often. But obviously the pandemic has put a wrench in that. But I will say that the reality of it is we're in a unique situation. You put it best. This is not the normal. This is a very unique situation. And you have to figure out the best way for your company to be able to weather this situation. Warner Brothers, while they obviously want to make everybody happy, they want the consumer to be happy, they want their theatrical partner, their theater partners to be happy, they want their talent to be happy, they want the creative people who are creating content for them to be happy, they want everybody to be happy. That's the ideal situation. But in reality, they're still a business, and they still have to make money for their business. And if they can't make the money that they should be making, they have to come up with other ways of making that money. And while I would, there's still certain films, if things get better, there are still certain films that are on their slate that I would go to see them in theaters, even though I have an HBO Max subscription, because I'd like to see them on that big screen. That's how I am. But I appreciate the fact that they're trying to do something that, even by, it is revolutionizing the industry, but it's almost unintentionally doing it specifically because they're looking out for themselves. That's why they're doing this. They're looking out for their core business and saying, we have these projects. We have two options. We can either not make hardly any money with them, we can push them to next, to 2022, or we can try to make the best of what we've got, which is put them on HBO Max. Money parts aside about how they're all going to, how the money's all going to work out for it, I think for the consumer, this is a great, great thing. And I applaud them for that. When it comes to the theaters, unfortunately, they're going to have to deal with the times changing. I mean, that's the one thing I didn't point out. The theaters themselves, they did respond to this announcement too. AMC CEO, the literal headline for them speaking their mind was AMC CEO livid about Warner Brothers' decision. And I have to say, well, it's funny that AMC is so livid about this, because they were also livid about Universal having Trolls come to theaters or come to pay video on demand back in April instead of going to theaters, even though we were in the height of the pandemic then. Here we are in a situation where we have even more cases than we did back in April, and theater owners are still sitting here, getting mad about the fact that these companies that still have to survive in order for them to survive are trying to figure out ways of making sure that their business survives, so that when things can eventually go back to normal, hopefully they still exist so that the theaters can exist as well. So I find it a little disconcerting that the theater owners can sit there and complain about a situation like this, when in reality, unless they're going to make people go out to the theaters in an unsafe situation and somehow collect money from them in this situation, I don't know how they're going to adjust anyway. If anything, I'd start trying to figure out ways of broadening your horizons and coming up with other ways of making money to hold yourself over for the next year, because let's be honest, it's not getting any better anytime in the immediate future. So I think that Warner Brothers is looking out for the consumer and obviously their bottom line, and that's what's most important to them right now. And I think that unfortunately there's a lot of other people, other parts of the equation that make, that WarnerMedia is trying to make happy. They're going to not be happy about this situation. But honestly, the way the future is, before Wonder Woman 1984 was announced to be coming to the streaming service, Disney, Viacom, CBS, WarnerMedia, they're all reorganizing their entire structure of their company to focus more on DTC, direct-to-consumer, their streaming services and things like that. And if that's what they're focusing on, then they should still be focusing on that going into 2021. You don't get a vaccine and suddenly stop focusing on that. There's a reason why these companies are focusing on it, and it's because it's much more profitable for them long-term to be focused on a DTC rather than having to split theatrical box offices with the theater companies and things like that. So while certain movies are going to obviously garner a ton more money in theaters, it's just not going to happen. So this is the best option, and I think that a lot of people are going to see that as time goes on, and it'll be really interesting because, like I said earlier, Disney is having an investor summit in 2 days from the time we're recording this, and if they sit there and announce that they're also going to be doing something similar where some of their top tier films, even if they're charging extra for their films like they did with Mulan for the premiere access, even if they do that, if they announce it, is there going to be as much backlash on Disney as there is on WarnerMedia? Because I don't think that's the case, because Disney is right now being very successful. It's a very good chance that they could be announcing they've got over 85 million subscribers as of the first year with Disney Plus, maybe even more. And the thing is, they're doing something right. Their stock prices are going up because of that. So the reality of it is, if Disney does something similar where they cut the theaters out, which, by the way, Disney was the top box office studio for 2019, if that's the case, is everyone going to get upset with Disney? Are the theater owners going to swear off Disney and say, like, no, they're doing it wrong? They can't afford to alienate Disney and Warner Brothers, who are number 1 and number 2, respectively, when it comes to box office returns. It's not feasible. All right, so with that being said, that is going to wrap up this episode. Obviously, this episode was a little bit longer than recent episodes, but there was a lot to talk about, and I think it was a good discussion. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. With that being said, there are a number of trailers that have released. I shouldn't say a number. It's been slowing down a little bit, but there are trailers that have released. You can find those as well as all of the articles that we talked about here on the podcast in our show notes, which can be found at thestreamingwars.io. You can also follow us on Twitter and join our Discord for all the latest articles that we talk about here on the podcast and some that we don't. You can follow us on Instagram for all the latest announcements related to new episodes of the podcast posting. You can send us an email at thestreamingwars@gmail.com with any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, or topics you'd like us to talk about in future episode. And speaking of feedback, if wherever you're listening to the podcast, we always greatly appreciate if you could leave us feedback as well. Next week we'll be back. We'll be talking about Disney's Investor Summit, and specifically all their streaming news that comes out of that. That'll be next week. And then, like I said last week, we'll be taking 2 weeks off for the holidays. So join us next week as we talk about that and everything else. With all of that being said, for Tony and myself, this has been the Stream Wars. Please continue to stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to the Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.